Emma had always loved the idea of adventure, so when her best friend suggested a girls-only cruise to the Caribbean, she jumped at the chance. Her husband, Mark, was a little hesitant at first. They'd been married for 10 years, and he trusted her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, he didn't want to seem controlling, so he encouraged her to go and enjoy herself. The cruise was everything Emma had hoped for: sun-drenched beaches, endless cocktails, and freedom from the monotony of daily life. One night, during a party on the ship, she met Adrian, a charming bartender with an intoxicating smile. Their flirtation began innocently enough, but as the drinks flowed and the music played, their chemistry became harder to ignore. By the end of the night, Emma crossed a line she never thought she would. She told herself it was a one-time mistake, a fleeting moment that would stay buried at sea. What Emma didn't know was that her girls' cruise wasn't as private as she thought. Mark had been feeling uneasy since she left, and decided to surprise her by booking a last-minute ticket on the same cruise. Disguised and blending in with the other passengers, Mark watched as Emma laughed, danced, and eventually disappeared with Adrian. His heart broke, but he kept his cool, formulating a plan that would ensure Emma would never forget the consequences of her actions. When Emma returned home, Mark acted as though everything was fine. He greeted her warmly, asked about her trip, and even helped unpack her bags. Emma, relieved that her secret was safe, resumed life as if nothing had happened. But Mark had been busy. He gathered all the evidence he needed: photos, videos, and even a copy of the receipt from the cruise showing Emma had upgraded to a couple suite for one of the nights. He carefully compiled everything into a folder, which he titled Memories from the Cruise. On their anniversary a few weeks later, Mark handed Emma a gift box. Inside was a folder and a neatly typed letter that read, "I thought this year we'd try something different. Instead of celebrating us, I thought we'd celebrate your unforgettable cruise. Here are some mementos. Don't worry. I've shared them with a few friends and family who might also enjoy them." Emma's face turned pale as she flipped through the folder. Before she could say anything, Mark dropped the final bombshell. "Oh, and by the way, I've filed for divorce. Don't worry. I made sure to include your memorable behavior in the paperwork. Happy anniversary." Mark didn't stop there. He shared the evidence with close friends and family, ensuring that Emma's betrayal wasn't hidden. He also made sure to come out of the divorce financially unscathed, having already consulted a lawyer about her infidelity. Emma's once perfect life unraveled quickly. Friends distanced themselves, and her reputation took a massive hit. Meanwhile, Mark moved on, eventually finding someone who valued loyalty and trust. As for Emma, she often looked back at that cruise and wondered if one fleeting moment of temptation was worth the price she paid. Mark, on the other hand, had no regrets. His epic revenge was more than just payback. It was a reminder that trust, once broken, can never fully be repaired. After the divorce, Mark threw himself into rebuilding his life. He sold their house, which held too many painful memories, and bought a sleek condo downtown. He also reconnected with old friends, joined a hiking club, and even took up traveling, a passion he had set aside during his marriage. Each new experience helped him heal, and before long, he started to feel like himself again. One evening, while attending a charity gala organized by a friend, Mark met a woman named Sophie. She was smart, witty, and refreshingly honest. Their connection was immediate, but Mark, still cautious after what he'd been through, took things slow. Over time, Sophie proved to be everything Emma wasn't: loyal, grounded, and genuinely kind. Meanwhile, Emma's life took a very different turn. She quickly learned that the fallout from her infidelity wasn't just personal. It had professional consequences too. The gossip spread, and soon colleagues at her workplace caught wind of her behavior. While her employer couldn't officially penalize her for what happened on her personal time, the whispers and judgment from co-workers made every day unbearable. Eventually, Emma left her job, hoping to start fresh somewhere else. Her attempts at dating were equally disastrous. Potential partners often learned about her past through mutual friends or social media, and the stigma of being the unfaithful wife followed her everywhere. Adrian, the bartender she had risked everything for, had vanished from her life the moment the cruise ended. In the rare, quiet moments she had, Emma couldn't help but wonder if the fleeting thrill of her actions had been worth the destruction they caused. Mark and Sophie's relationship blossomed over the following year. Sophie encouraged Mark to embrace his adventurous side, and together they traveled to places he had only dreamed of visiting. One of their trips took them to the Caribbean, the very destination where Mark's life had taken such a dramatic turn. While strolling on the beach one evening, Sophie asked him about his past. Mark hesitated at first, but decided to share the story of Emma's betrayal. Sophie listened without judgment, then took his hand and said, "I'm glad she made that mistake. If she hadn't, I might never have met you." For the first time, Mark felt true closure. He realized that while Emma's betrayal had been painful, it had also set him on a path to a better life. As for Emma, she remained stuck in a cycle of regret and self-pity. She occasionally tried to reach out to Mark, apologizing and even hinting at reconciliation, but Mark never responded. He had moved on, and he wasn't looking back. In the end, Emma's choices left her with nothing but memories of what she'd lost. Mark, on the other hand, built a new life filled with love, trust, and adventure. His epic revenge wasn't just about exposing Emma's betrayal. It was about reclaiming his happiness and proving that, sometimes, the best revenge is living well. As the years passed, Mark and Sophie's life together flourished. They got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. It was a stark contrast to the elaborate, hollow wedding Mark had once shared with Emma. This time, every moment felt genuine and filled with love. They eventually started a family, welcoming 2 children who became the light of their lives. Mark often reflected on how far he had come from those dark days after the divorce. His love for Sophie and their children gave him a sense of fulfillment he'd never known before. Emma, however, struggled to find her footing. The choices she'd made on that cruise haunted her in ways she never anticipated. She tried moving to a new city to escape the whispers of her past, but the shame she carried followed her wherever she went. Relationships came and went, but none lasted. Trust was a rare commodity, and even when she found someone willing to give her a chance, her guilt and insecurity often sabotaged things before they could truly begin. One fateful day, years after the divorce, Emma ran into Mark at an airport. He was with Sophie and their 2 children, returning from yet another family vacation. Mark looked happy, radiant even, and his children clung to his hands, laughing as Sophie teased him about his attempt at carrying all the luggage. Emma's heart sank as she stood frozen, watching the life she'd once dreamed of living unfold before her eyes. When Mark finally noticed her, he offered a polite nod but didn't stop to chat. His brief acknowledgement was enough to remind Emma of the unbridgeable distance between them now. Later that evening, Emma sat in her hotel room, replaying the encounter in her mind. It was a stark reminder of the life she'd thrown away and the happiness Mark had found without her. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully confront the reality of her actions. Not just a betrayal, but the deeper truth about who she had become and the choices that had brought her there. Mark, meanwhile, barely gave the encounter a second thought. His life was too full of love, laughter, and purpose to dwell on the past. He'd learned to forgive, not for Emma's sake, but for his own. Letting go of the anger had freed him to embrace the future, and he was determined to make the most of it. As the years continued to roll on, Mark's story became one of redemption and growth, while Emma's remained one of loss and regret. Their paths had diverged completely, a testament to the choices they'd each made. For Mark, the ultimate revenge wasn't just exposing Emma's betrayal or securing a favorable divorce. It was living a life so rich, so full of joy and meaning, that the wounds of the past no longer mattered. For Emma, the Caribbean cruise that had once promised freedom became a symbol of everything she'd lost, a painful reminder of how one impulsive decision could change a life forever. Years turned into decades, and Mark's life remained a testament to resilience and the power of moving forward. His children grew up surrounded by love and stability, inheriting his adventurous spirit and Sophie's unshakable kindness. Family vacations became cherished traditions, and as his kids ventured into adulthood, Mark took pride in watching them succeed, knowing the foundation he'd built with Sophie had given them the confidence to chase their dreams. One evening, after a family dinner celebrating his daughter's graduation, Mark found himself reminiscing with Sophie on their porch. The stars glittered above, and the gentle hum of cicadas filled the air. Sophie leaned her head on his shoulder and asked, "Do you ever think about how life could have been different?" Mark smiled softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not with regret. Everything that happened, as painful as it was, led me to you, to our family. I wouldn't change a thing." Meanwhile, Emma's life took on a quieter, more solitary rhythm. She had moved back to her hometown, where she worked a modest job at a local bookstore. Over time, the fire of regret dulled into a lingering ache, a constant companion rather than a sharp sting. She no longer reached out to Mark, having finally accepted that their paths were irreversibly separate. Though her life lacked the excitement she had once craved, Emma found small comforts in routine. She spent her days reading, volunteering at a nearby animal shelter, and tending to a small garden behind her rented home. But no matter how much time passed, she couldn't escape the nagging sense of what if, one day, while sorting through an old box of keepsakes, Emma found a faded photo from the cruise, the last tangible reminder of the choices that had altered her life. Staring at the image, she whispered aloud, "If only I'd known." But life doesn't grant rewinds, and Emma knew that better than most. Mark, on the other hand, had fully embraced the philosophy that life's trials were stepping stones, not barriers. When his first grandchild was born, he held the tiny baby in his arms and marveled at how much love his life contained. Looking into the infant's eyes, he thought about the man he used to be, the one who had once believed his world had ended. He realized now how wrong he'd been. What had felt like the end was actually a beginning, an opportunity to rebuild a life stronger and better than before. And he had done just that. Emma's story became a cautionary tale she shared only with herself in her quiet moments, while Mark's life became an example of how adversity could lead to something extraordinary. In the end, Mark's revenge wasn't just epic because of how he exposed Emma. It was because he had triumphed, not through bitterness, but through resilience, joy, and a commitment to living a life so full that the past simply faded into the background. As Mark entered the later years of his life, he found himself reflecting on everything he had been through. He often thought about the younger version of himself, the man who had been blindsided by betrayal, crushed under the weight of heartbreak. If he could talk to that man now, he'd tell him something simple. Asterisk, you'll be okay. Better than okay. Asterisk. Retirement brought Mark and Sophie even closer. They spent their days traveling to places they dreamed of seeing, from the rugged cliffs of Ireland to the serene temples of Japan. Mark wrote a memoir during this time, not to air grievances from his past, but to share his journey of healing and self-discovery. He titled it Second Chances, and it became a modest hit among readers who found inspiration in his story. One day, while doing a book signing at a small-town bookstore, Mark was surprised to see Emma in line. She looked older, her face lined with a weariness that life had etched over time. When she reached the table, she hesitated, clutching a copy of his book. "Mark," she said softly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Mark regarded her with the calm and kindness of a man who had long since let go of his anger. "Hello, Emma." She placed the book on the table for him to sign. "I read your story. I'm glad you found happiness. You deserved it." "Thank you," Mark replied, pen hovering over the title page. After a pause, he added, "And I hope you've found peace." Emma gave a faint smile. "I'm working on it. It's a process." Mark nodded, then signed the book with a simple message. To Emma, may you always remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story. When she left, Mark felt no bitterness, no resentment, only a quiet gratitude for how far he had come. Emma walked away with tears in her eyes, clutching the book to her chest. His words stayed with her, sparking something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She returned to her modest life with a new resolve. She started taking small steps to rebuild herself, not for anyone else but for her own sense of worth. Mark and Sophie continued to grow their legacy, not just through their children and grandchildren, but through the countless lives touched by Mark's memoir and his journey of resilience. His story became one of redemption, not just from betrayal, but from bitterness, proving that the greatest revenge is not living well despite someone else, but living well for your own joy. Emma, too, began to make peace with her past. Though her life would never match the joy and fullness of Mark's, she found small victories in forgiveness, starting with herself. As the years stretched on, their lives remained as they had for so long. Two separate paths, each shaped by choices made long ago. But if there was one truth that endured for both of them, it was this: no matter how deep the wounds, healing is always possible, and a new chapter is only ever one choice away. As the final chapter of Mark's life unfolded, he found himself surrounded by love, family, and a deep sense of fulfillment. His grandchildren adored their adventurous Papa Mark, and he took great pride in sharing his stories and wisdom with them. They loved his tales of resilience, especially the way he had turned a painful betrayal into a life of purpose and joy. One summer evening, Mark and Sophie sat together on their back porch, watching a brilliant sunset over the horizon. Sophie took his hand in hers, her eyes warm and filled with admiration. "You've lived a remarkable life, Mark," she said softly. Mark smiled, squeezing her hand. "We've lived a remarkable life. I wouldn't trade a single moment of it." Meanwhile, Emma, now in her late 60s, had finally found a sense of peace. Though her life had taken a quieter, more solitary route, she had grown into a person who understood the value of self-reflection and the power of forgiveness. Over the years, she had reached out to a few people she had wronged, not to undo the past, but to acknowledge it and seek closure. One day, Emma received news of Mark's passing. It came through an old mutual friend who had seen his obituary in the local paper. The announcement was a testament to his extraordinary life. Loving husband, devoted father, doting grandfather, celebrated author, and a man who had inspired countless others with his strength and positivity. Emma attended the memorial service quietly, sitting in the back row. She listened as Mark's family and friends shared stories about his humor, kindness, and unwavering resilience. As she looked around the room filled with people who loved and admired him, she realized just how profoundly Mark had touched the lives of others. After the service, Emma approached Sophie, who stood greeting mourners with the same grace and warmth that had drawn Mark to her all those years ago. Emma introduced herself, unsure of how Sophie would react. To her surprise, Sophie smiled kindly. "You're Emma," Sophie said, not with malice but with understanding. "Mark mentioned you a few times. He said you were a big part of his journey." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything I put him through, and to thank you for loving him the way he deserved." Sophie placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. Mark didn't hold on to anger. He let go so he could move forward, and it made him the man we all loved. He forgave you a long time ago. I think, in his own way, he wished you peace. Emma nodded, her heart heavy yet lighter than it had been in years. She left the memorial with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to honor Mark's legacy by continuing her own journey of self-improvement. In the years that followed, Emma dedicated herself to helping others who had made mistakes, volunteering at support groups and mentoring people seeking second chances. She shared her story, not to dwell on the past, but to show that redemption was always possible, even when the road was long and difficult. Mark's memory lived on in the hearts of those who loved him and in the pages of his memoir, which continued to inspire people around the world. His story became a beacon of hope, A reminder that no matter how broken life may seem, it's always possible to rebuild, stronger, brighter, and more beautiful than before. And though their lives had taken such different paths, both Mark and Emma left the world, having learned the same profound truth. It's not the mistakes we make that define us, but how we rise from them, and the lives we choose to build in the aftermath.